Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of Farah Bashir's brilliant first book, Rumours of Spring. We at HarperCollins are very pleased to publish Farah's first book under our Fourth Estate imprint. This is a memoir of her growing up years in Kashmir. I'm Shravini, an editor from HarperCollins, and we're pleased to collaborate with Champaka Bookstore today for this launch. Champaka is a very vibrant, independent, women-run bookstore, children's library and cafe based in Bangalore. They also have an online store that ships across India where you can find all the books that are available on their shelves, and you can also order your copy of Rumours of Spring from their website. Coming on to our event now, we are based in 3 different locations at the moment. Farah Bashir, let me introduce to you. Farah Bashir was born and raised in Kashmir. Rumours of Spring is her first book, her brilliant memoir. We also have Madhuri Vijay joining us in this event. Madhuri is the author of The Far Field, which won the JCB Prize for Literature in 2019, the Tata Lit Live First Book Award, and numerous other awards. Thank you for joining us today, Madhuri. Rumours of Spring is an extraordinary, illuminating account of Farah's girlhood years spent in Srinagar amidst increasing violence and political turmoil. It took Farah almost a decade to write the book, and it also took us a while to publish the book with the pandemic raging. But here we are finally with this extraordinary, illuminating, resilient book in our hands. Madhuri, Farah, I will invite you to launch the book formally right now. We'll hold our copies. Madhuri, your copy will be reaching you soon, but yes, here we go. And Farah, now I would invite you to read some passages from the book.
Sure. Thank you, Shohini. Hi, Madhuri. So I'm going to read 2 passages from the book. One is about, the times that these despairing times that we find ourselves in during the second wave of COVID in India. It just took me back. We're all locked inside. It's been weeks since I've stepped out, And the same for so many people, they have their loved ones in the hospitals. Most of us who are locked inside, the only connection to the world are our windows. You look out. The other day, there was an ambulance downstairs, and how did I see it? I just went to the window, and there are all these desolate faces on other windows in the neighborhood, looking out, completely helpless. And it actually took me to a time where windows were such an important part. Opening and closing of windows really meant a thin line between life and death. It connoted, it symbolized something between life and something about life and something about death. So I'm going to read a passage about windows. It's from this chapter, Evening Salute, and it's about windows. Bob spent hours on the second floor, sitting behind different windows. In the mornings, behind the wire mesh of the window in the kitchen, she watched me leave for the bus stop with Ramzan Kak. During the late afternoons, when I returned from the school, I'd find my favorite hung yogurt hanging in a white muslin cloth from a peg above the same window. In the evenings, she would soak up the charm of the street as it filled with young women returning from colleges or tuitions and men gathered at Varnpyund discussing politics or bantering. Bobby used windows for another purpose. She communicated with her youngest and favorite daughter, Nilofer, a lecturer at a nearby college, through different windows, as she didn't rely on the phone too much. Bobo would stand near the window of the drawing room if she had an urgent message to pass on. It was the corner window, the first one visible from the lane which led to my aunt's college. She made it appear urgent by standing there, for this would prompt my aunt to walk into our house immediately. Some days, to kill time, she sat on the windowsill of the study adjacent to the drawing room. My sister Hina also used windows to call her friend Rifat. Her window was on the second floor in our parents' room, which was right above the living room. On some summer evenings before 1989, after school, I'd spend time by the windows of the big hall on the fourth floor of our house. I'd take a bottle of water with me and empty it slowly by pouring it onto the street. It amused me to see the droplets dance their way down. The water never fell on anyone, or maybe it did, but no one ever looked up in anger to reprimand me. Every window in our house seemed to have been assigned a specific role. Each one had numerous tales to tell. Because of Bob, the window of our house remained slightly open even during the harshest of winter. Being asthmatic, she needed a constant flow of fresh air, but that seemed to be more of an excuse, as she couldn't rid herself of the habit to peer outside and observe passers-by. It was as if through them she were living an active life, since she hardly went out herself. However, things changed after 1989, and the windows had to be tightly shut during the incessant spells of curfew. In the late autumn of 1990, it had already been 3 seasons since we had opened the windows, especially the ones overlooking the street. Open windows were an easy and unobstructed passage for bullets and grenade splinters to make their way inside. Even a peep could be dangerous. Letting in fresh air would cost us dearly. So this is one. And the second passage I'm going to read is from the chapter Shadow of a Siege. It's again, while all of us are confined to our homes and there are children who have to take exams, and there has been recently this debate going on whether CBSE board exams should be cancelled or what should they do about it. So there's a huge dilemma, and it also reminded me again of a time when, due to prolonged curfews and rescheduling and firings, because of the heightened years of political strife in Kashmir, our exams would never happen on time. So I almost used to lose all the interest. I mean, I would be bribed by my grandmother or mother to do well, but by the time exams would happen, there would inevitably be something, and it just didn't matter anymore. So I'm going to read a passage, basically, from that time. If you graduate with this distinction, I'll get you gold earrings that are bigger than I gave your sister. Mother had promised me. Father had promised to buy me a camera. Other relatives were expected to give token money. as and when they would visit our home to congratulate me after the exam results were declared. There would perhaps be a small party. To celebrate her grades, a distant cousin had her ears pierced in the presence of guests. Another one got engaged during a celebratory party, as her would-be mother-in-law was smitten by her beauty on the day of the function. Graduating with a distinction was life-changing in many ways. While I was not inclined to getting engaged or to have my ears pierced, I had mine done many years ago, I was looking forward to taking the big decisions of life. I was getting impatient to plan my life beyond high school. I was getting excited to finally give up studying subjects that I lacked interest in. I wanted to read Urdu for pleasure and not necessarily to pass exams or secure good grades. Matric pass connoted a new life, a passage to freedom. Thereafter, one could choose to be anything: doctor, engineer, lawyer, lecturer, the azadi to choose one's destiny. It was also for the first time that we could compete with the students across the valley and Ladakh, though not the entire state. The school term in Jammu had a different academic calendar from ours. Even though the board or state exams were not supposed to be as tough compared to the ones held at school, it was a sheer number of pupils appearing for them that made them more exciting and challenging. Owing it to being another unquiet year, just like the previous two, in 1992, schools across Kashmir had been open sporadically, and all of us struggled to finish our syllabus by ourselves at home. I was not particularly good at physics and had to seek help from my cousin who lived nearby. He would come over to our place and to help me whenever he could, but even that wasn't enough. Indefinite curfew interspersed with civil curfew lasted for days on end. But private tuition or not, I was determined to secure a good percentage. I studied relentlessly. Your future depends on these results, Mother would often say throughout the year. She said it more emphatically on the morning when Ramzan Kak excitedly announced as he walked into the living room with a pot full of bread. Date sheet Dramut. Looking at my exam date sheet printed in a newspaper made it a big deal. I was so excited that I ran a mild fever for a couple of days, but there was worse to come. It was the week of December, and our exams were to begin soon. Babri Masjid in Ayodhya was demolished. We in Kashmir were put under preventive curfew, as if we didn't have enough curfews of our own. It impacted our exams, postponements, and rescheduling. The exams that were supposed to end in 10 days took a month and a half to finish. I lost interest in getting a good score. It was difficult to maintain enthusiasm, and the curfews put our willpower to test. I didn't care how well I didn't secure a distinction. By the time results came out, 5 months after they were supposed to, my excitement had dried up completely. The gifts promised to me by my family were forgotten. There was no celebratory lunch at our house, not because of my grades, they were not shameful, but the fact that between December 1992 and April 1993, another tragedy befell us. After a gun battle in Lal Chowk near Palladium Cinema, troops had set ablaze an entire patch of shops. My maternal aunt's husband and some more relatives owned a few of them. It was in the wake of that misfortune that Boba encouraged me to do better the next year. She promised to give me the heirloom ring again. The promise didn't stir anything in me. It seemed like the time of exams had become jinxed. In October 1993, a month before the dates were announced for the final exams, militants had taken refuge in the Hazratbal shrine. It's going to be Karbala this time. May Parvardigar keep all of us in his safe custody. Mother sighed. When Moy Muqaddas was stolen in the 1960s, thousands of people took to the streets. People would gladly lay their lives to protect the relic of their beloved prophet, peace be upon him. Thankfully, it had miraculously reappeared after 2 weeks on its own. With the siege and subsequent desecration of the mosque, despair and panic found their way into every house in our neighborhood. Boba sobbed ceaselessly on her prayer rug. Father and Ramzan Kak remained glued to the transistor radio for news updates. The siege lasted for around 40 days. It involved prolonged negotiations between the militants and the government. Every other day, there were new demands from the militants, and state laid out new conditions. People, as expected, took to the streets, but dense militarization ensured they did not reach Dargah. Scores of unarmed protesters were killed and injured. during that October near Vejbur. Unsure of the outcome and the uncertainty that prevailed around the siege, I had lost all the resolve to do well in my exams. What was the point? People were struggling to stay alive. How did my distinction matter? The round-the-clock curfew, the killings, the protests, the futile dialogues, the labeling of men sometimes as militants, sometimes as mercenaries, the constant shifting of power had done its damage. I didn't know then, but it was the beginning of an apathy for my own self that would last for a long time. Our lives are controlled from elsewhere, and the dreams that we dreamt were always at the mercy of someone else, someone occupying us, ruling us. The red of the coral of Boba's ring did not appeal to me anymore. So yes, those were two passages.
Thank you so much, Farah, for those words. Now, Madhuri and Farah, I invite you to join us in this conversation.
Sure.
Thank you, Shohini. And thank you, Farah, for reading a little bit of Rumours of Spring for us and for giving us a glimpse into the world of the book. As Shohini said, my name is Madhuri Vijay, and I'm really extraordinarily happy and humbled to be here today, taking part in the launch of Farah Bashir's first memoir, Rumours of Spring. Books like Farah's are very rare, simply because they're almost impossible to write. You need to have a combination of um, honesty, humor, compassion, insight, and sheer, almost superhuman grit. People who have those qualities are very, very few, and it's very lucky for all of us that Farah Bashir is one of those people. So thank you so much, Farah, for this memoir and for giving me the chance to ask you a little more about it. I encourage everybody who's watching to pick it up immediately and read it. You will be very, very glad that you did. Farah, I'll start with the title.
Sure.
It's taken from a poem by Agha Shahid Ali. Why that poem? Why that phrase? And how early in the process did you know that this was the title?
Thanks, Madhuri, for such a kind intro, firstly. Now back to your question. Agha Shahid Ali has been a place of refuge for a lot of us. We go back to his poems every time we want to articulate our words and we find ourselves without any. We just go to his books, to his words, to his poems and open them and read them as if he's really articulating our silences, our helplessness as Kashmiris who grew up in that time. He had a little more insight in what was happening. Probably he was able to process it. So that's why he wrote so brilliantly and it's so crystal clear what he's trying to communicate. So there's no vagueness, there's nothing of that sort. Most of his poems, a lot of his poems appeal to me, but this particular one about, it somehow created a visual imagery for me. This particular phrase, Rumours of Spring, they last from dusk to dawn. It was as if when I think back and I look at the entire decade of 90s, I do remember these fragments of memory. I mean, they keep coming back. But the first visual imagery is of one long evening. I think probably because that's when our life changed, and I remember that vividly. And it's the whispers in the air, the uncertainty, the tentativeness of the environment around us. So it sort of, for me, appealed to me emotionally, and I had it. I wrote this book recently. I started in 2017. I wrote 2 manuscripts before this, which I completely discarded, and they were completely 2 different stories, but the title was the same. It captured something in me that I was not really able to articulate, that Agha Shahid Ali articulated for us. And as the book took form and these memories came back, I really anchored them on literally on his words. And I drew strength from his poems, especially that it captures that visual imagery, which I don't think I can really express what it does, but it appeals at a very emotional, visceral level. And it's that strange blue hue that I think of from tear gas, the entire city wearing a very desolate look, but there's also hope in this title, which is probably what, like I said, it as if the contents of the book sort of derive the energy and the life that they eventually took from that title. There's hope, there is spring, but there's also reality. So there's also this juxtaposition that you see in the chapters. So that's what he did.
Yeah, it's a beautiful phrase, a beautiful idea, very complex idea. And in fact, that blue hue of evening and tear gas that you talk about does hang over the entire book. And I think your book begins in the evening,
That is right.
if I'm not mistaken. And it begins with the death of your grandmother, who, if I may, presume to say, is one of the most important figures in the book and perhaps in your life as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about her? What kind of woman was she? What did she mean to you?
I was very close to her, more than I was close to my parents. I was very close to her. She did everything that a mother does, right, for me. But more than that, she was a very progressive woman. She was not educated herself. She was not literate, but she was looking at all the good things around her, and she wanted to see all those things in me. She wanted me to be a doctor, but she would also say, become a dermatologist, Jildish doctor, because she imagined that if you were to become a doctor, then you would also have to be awake at nights. But she couldn't bear that for me, that I would have to, sacrifice my sleep.
So this was a compromise.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, become a dermatologist in that sense for her. But she was very progressive, and she'd also supported my aunts in their education. In fact, like my grandfather was very conservative, wanted his daughters to get married early, as it happens in South Asian societies. She actually hid it from him till my aunt almost completed her PhD, and she sort of trusted her, and they had a understanding, and she would be home before he came back from the shop. And she actually has a PhD only because of her. And what I also realized was, when I looked back and in retrospect, I looked at all these memories and I spent time with the drafts, I realized that I hadn't really written much after her death. So, and then I started examining her. The structure actually came after the book was picked up by HarperCollins, and it just appeared to me that I hadn't written much about her death. So, and then I looked back at her life in those 4 years, when insurgency erupted in 1989 until the year she died in 1994. I saw her shrivel, literally. She was this tall, very elegant woman, had a very strong presence, and people used to look up to her, and she had always these great advices to give. But for her she used to spend most of her time at the windows, like I read out. For her to completely alter those things, her habits, towards the end of her life, for her to be fearful, for her to not know what was happening outside. She would mispronounce bunkers as banker, and I would chide her sometimes. And then I realized what was happening to her. She was being introduced in the late years of her life to a world which was so threatening. And I just feel and it happens to so many of our grandmothers who, when grandparents become old, you start giving them a certain kind of respect, and they become really special for us. And to see where I derived my strength, my love, all of that from, to see that person feeling threatened, shriveling up, I think it was a trauma that sort of, I didn't even know I carried it in me till I wrote. And I see my I see my niece now, who is who has same kind of relationship with her, similar kind of relationship with my mum, who's a relatively a stronger person. But I can't imagine if she were to see my mum sort of deteriorate in her, not only through her health, but the circumstances around her. diminishing her, decimating her. And what does it do to a child? Their life, the center of their universe, gets shaken.
Yeah. Yeah, for you it seemed to be, she was literally the center of the universe, and she is the center of the book, the spine of the book almost. She runs through every single
Yeah,
chapter. Every chapter begins with her, almost like a literal spine, and then the chapters are the sort of ribs that go out from the spine, and
absolutely.
they are held in place, they're anchored in place, by that one, by her knowledge, her wisdom, her increasing fear, her disorientation, and the agony that you feel watching all of this unfold. It's a really unusual and very, very heartbreaking structure, I thought. And I think a lot of people think a memoir is just, what's so difficult about a memoir? You just say what happened, right? You start at the beginning and then say and then and then and then. But really, it's a work of literature. You have to choose how to tell something, how to tell even the simplest thing. There are a number of choices to make. Could you tell us a little bit about the sort of artistic choices that you made while writing this incredibly personal story?
See, there is so much written about Kashmir that it actually becomes a challenge in itself. What's the new thing that you're going to write? I remember when I was trying to write 10 years ago, and there were like lots of friends, cynics, who would be like, what's the new thing that you're going to say? Everything has been told, but there's nothing new that you're going to write about. And I thought for a long time, I thought maybe yes. And that's why I was working on fiction initially. And I was trying to write novels. But increasingly, when in 2010 there were 120 boys who were killed, and it was these were like all these boys were teenagers. Most of them, the youngest was 8 years old. It really made me look back and look at my teenage and adolescence and see what happens to a girl. Have we seen what happened? Because a lot of journalists sort of followed and sort of reported on the kinds of lives these boys lived. They went to their rooms, they took photographs of their belongings, of the report cards. It was a very moving, detailed account that they brought out. And I was like, what happens to uh, girls who go through this and cannot articulate what's happening because of fear, because of you just want to be invisible. So that was one part of it, to examine it. And second was to why would anyone read a young girl's story? Aren't there enough stories about Kashmir, and why should they write? And there are more devastating accounts which come out. So it was really trying to humanize it, trying to basically show what can happen, like in an ordinary thing, like where you need to go to the washroom at night and you cannot switch on lights and you want medication for your period cramps, something as small as that, as which things people take for granted. I also wanted to shift the lens back to humanity, because the kind of media that's reported on Kashmir, there's so much of dehumanization. People look at numbers, okay, fine. It's been normalized over so many years. And then what happens to these people who are left behind, who don't die, who survive? Uh, there is this particular quote from a sentence from Hisham Attar's memoir, The Return. His father was one of the political prisoners who was disappeared. It says, is there greater achievement than suffering, of coming through mostly intact? So what happens to these people and how do they live? I thought it was important. That for me started becoming like a story that I wanted to tell, but I didn't want to be like a favor to the reader. I wanted it to I wanted to just I didn't want to tell these stories shabbily. So just because they were, initially they were, Shohini would know, they were sort of, I did 3 structural drafts. One was about the years, like 4 years, and we put memories like that. Another was about how thematically. And then finally, when I saw that there was nothing after my grandmother's death, and I thought, no, this is really the anchor that I've been looking at.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating to know. because I think people have this idea you just sit down, you write, and then there's a book, right? But it's a much more um, convoluted, digressive process than that. So thank you for telling us about that. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You write about all the people in your life with incredible respect, and incredible detail and affection. But you also write about um, culture, that particular Kashmiri culture of the late 80s, well, not, but that sort of ended when the insurgency began, or that was almost another casualty of the violence. For example, Kashmiri Muslim weddings, as you write, which are normally night affairs, have to be moved to the daytime because
Today.
of curfew. And in a personal example, you write about an episode where the winter rations, the winter store of food in your house, are raided by soldiers who think that nobody would store so much food unless they're harboring militants. But that's actually a tradition, is to store food for the winter. Um, why was it so important to you to not only talk about the personal toll, on you and the other individuals, but also these the sort of the cultural toll? What is at stake in these communal rituals?
Uh, we Kashmiris, we take a lot of pride in our culture and our heritage, and losing that so fast was, I think, more debilitating than anything else for a young girl, because when you're growing up as a young girl into a young woman, there are certain rituals, certain traditions that you will follow, and you will behave in a certain way, and it's going to be your way of life. And when that changes overnight, you are really on shaky grounds. You don't know what's going on. You're losing family, you're losing friends. There is mayhem in the city and the whole place. And on top of that, you're also losing these traditions, rituals, which really hold the society together. So, and I, and it's a loss that a lot of us feel very it's not sad, but we feel almost like it's very personal. Like, and we try to create these things now by ourselves wherever we can. Of course, I can't store that much granary here, but whatever little things, whether it's cooking the same way, like for example, if I have to cook, I cook exactly the way mom would cook, even though I have not been living in Kashmir, for a while now. But it's about retaining parts of your identity. I remember there is this writer, Amin Malouf, who actually there's this book that he's in his book on identity. He talks about how culture. He actually ranks culture over religion and says how it's so important for one's identity that so losing that was also losing a part of your identity. And it's also this book, like you rightly said, it also captures a period, a time in Kashmir's contemporary history which doesn't exist anymore. And it's almost like a record of social history from that period. I would it I mean, as I already see my nephew, who is around 21, he looks at this and almost treats it like a book of history. Oh, this used to happen. Oh, that, so there are certain things that he had no idea of, or there are also certain things which he can't relate with. He'd be like, why were you so afraid when there was curfew? What was the big deal? Because he's grown up in curfew, he's born into curfew. So there are things which the younger generation is also picking from this book. It's not only what happened to women, to children, but it's also how a time was completely transformed overnight, literally, and so much was lost so fast.
Yeah. And I think a culture's resilience, or people's resilience, is often to be found in culture, in shared rituals of whether it's weddings or funerals or, festival days. What makes us a particular culture is contained in doing certain things together. And when you aren't able to do those things, then you're just people in a place, um,
Exactly.
and you're alone, and that's it's much harder to sort of um, r- resist whatever might be trying to push against you. Yeah, so it was, for me, that was a very unexpected and really, really sad part of the book, because you're right, in so much of what I've read, at least about Kashmir, a lot of it is focusing on what has sort of been added, the sort of the addition of fear, the addition of violence, the addition of soldiers and militants, and all, it's all sort of what has come into it, but not what has sort of been um, taken away in that
Yeah,
sense.
it's
So
also as it was a profound loss as our generation, especially because we've seen closely. We were old enough to absorb what was going on, about to understand the codes of our culture and wanting to live them, and be the kind of people we would be. But then suddenly that's turned completely upside down, and then they keep diminishing. I remember there used to be this man who used to come for Eid, and on the morning of Eid, and he used to play Shehnai in our courtyard in the morning. And I haven't, it's been 30 years. I spent whole Eid at home. I haven't seen any Shehnai Wala. And
yeah,
if you talk to 30-year-olds now, they would have no idea who this person was. And I don't know where he went and what happened to him. So it's also what Kashmir was like 30 years ago in terms of culture, and how we've lost that too. And that's not an easy loss.
yeah, yeah. As a it was a very strange reading experience that I had, when I was reading your book. So much of what you write about is was so familiar to me, because there are these various stages of girlhood, which I had, going to school, and in one particular example, you write about covering your school books with brown paper. I did that. I still remember, fold this way, clip this, snip this, do that, paste here, all of that. I still remember all of that. And so when I was reading that particular episode, I had this feeling of, absolute sort of connection with, you know, recognition of what you were describing in that moment. But as I kept reading, a very strange thing happened. All of a sudden, I couldn't recognize it anymore, because you stopped talking about brown paper, and you said you ran out of it, and you started covering your books with
Mhm.
English newspapers.
Newspaper.
Yeah, and you from India, and you would look at the ads for laundry detergent or for toothpaste, and you'd look at the people who are the models for those ads, and they're smiling. And if you don't mind, I just read what that passage. You say, I wondered if they even knew that not 1,000 kilometers away, it had become commonplace for ordinary people to survive the fallouts of war, like losing limbs in grenade blasts, being grazed by bullets, contracting splinters, being caught in crossfirings, losing their sons to arrests, and their homes turned into battlefields. What kind of advertisements could such everyday routines inspire? Not ones pretty enough to be printed in full color, I thought. Now, when I read this, it was like a trap door opened under me. One minute I thought I knew what was going on. A girl was covering her books in brown paper, and all of a sudden I was in this world where I didn't know what was going on. It was dangerous, and it was sort of an uncanny valley. It was like I sort of knew, but I didn't know. And as I kept reading, I started to be on lookout out for these trap doors. So I was thinking, okay, is this story about going to a doctor going to turn into a story about a gunfight? Is this visit to a cousin's house going to become, a horror story? And I was very unsettled the whole time. I was always on the lookout for danger. And I realized the genius of it is that you have succeeded in making me, the reader, feel some fraction of the uncertainty that must have been an everyday reality for you growing up. Was this a technique that you deliberately cultivated to sort of turn the familiar unfamiliar, to begin with the most ordinary comforting scenes, and to kind of pull the rug out from under the reader? Because you do it often.
Yes, so it's the first chapter of the book, and that 1 hour, that metamorphic hour, where we go into that salon and come out, and the world has changed for us. I mean, we go in thinking we're going to look like, the way we would look like for Eid the next day, and we had big, prep before Eid. You always have plans. We're going to get this much Eid. We're going to spend on whatever little things we're going to buy. So it's like additional pocket money that almost you're getting twice a year. And then all of that completely changes, because when you come out, and you come out to a cousin's death, and you come out to the entire place completely desolate. And I think I was trying to keep that constant in the book of that shift, that abrupt shift, and which is what life was changing on an hourly basis back then. And it was, so I couldn't have had so many shifts, but it was that shift that could have been constant throughout the book. So that was conscious. And I also like this, I really admire this, the writing of this Chinese American writer, Yi Yun Lee. I think it's something that she also does in her short stories, and it's always appealed to me. And when I started writing, I realized why was it appealing to me, because life did change. But that abruptness was so much a part of our life, and sometimes still is. You'll sleep perfectly okay. In the morning, you wake up, you'll open your Twitter, and then suddenly you'll see people have been killed. Something has happened. There's crackdown. Houses have been burned down, and it's that unexpectedness of life. So much uncertainty that I really wanted to leave, but not jar the reader, but leave there. So, I mean, it's what you're telling me, what you're describing is, I recently watched this Palestinian film, The Present, and it's about a daughter and her father navigating checkpoints in Palestine. And it's a short feature film, about 35 minutes. The whole time you're expected something bad to happen to them. Is the trauma that you also feel, that that of uncertainty, of that abruptness, that that you as a reader, as an audience, sort of absorb. But for me, it was really that hour that I wanted to mimic throughout the narrative.
You do so. It's very, very effective, and very, very, it lasts even beyond the end of the book. You still feel a sense of unsettledness, the idea that life can change on a dime. It can change in the next minute, no, in the next minute, no, in the next minute. And we all have, in the last year at least, experienced that life has changed for all of us, no matter where we are, no matter who we are. We are all familiar with that sense of today is okay, tomorrow might be disaster.
Exactly.
But I suppose on the same token, you might think, in keeping with the title of your book, today was disaster, maybe tomorrow will be okay. There's also that possibility, right, which we have to hold out for, I guess. You recently said something very fascinating to me. You said, it increasingly appears to me as if the understanding of India by its citizenry is contingent upon them understanding Kashmir in its entirety, as if the comprehension of the political is dependent on the knowledge of the personal, and the personal has turned into an inescapable collective. Could you tell us a little more about what you mean by this, and why is it so important to save the personal?
It's when there have been incidents of violence in Delhi, especially in India, in the last few years. And every time people just take to Twitter or social media and say, oh, there's Kashmir, India is turning into Kashmir, it's Kashmirization of India. And it used to really offend me in a way, because you really, just because there is a part of country's capital where you see violence in a certain pocket to a certain minority, it's really not Kashmirization of India. Where life comes to a standstill, where everyone is impacted, where there is an epidemic of mental health, where where people leave the houses and there's no guarantee, or at least when I was growing up, no guarantee of them coming back alive. So don't make these. I mean, I used to find it very insensitive that these comparisons were being made. And now when you see that with this epidemic and these large waves, second, and all these uncontrollable pandemic waves sort of gripping the country, and you feel like the other day someone wrote to me, there was this review about how people who've been trapped inside their houses for about a year are really making comparisons with how it must feel in Kashmir. So I was thinking to myself, like, if you have to be trapped, is that only when you think of Kashmir? So right now, what we see, the way this pandemic is being sort of handled, there's the administration, the government is missing, and people are really relying on each other. So it's if you really see, the personal has become this big collective. There is no difference now. One person's grief is everyone's grief, and that is what you grow up, what one grew up with in Kashmir. It's not that one neighbor's son was killed or taken away. The grief was so vast, and it had touched every home in some way or the other, that if something happened somewhere, you felt it. So I that is what I meant by personal becoming collective, this inescapable collective, and also very political, because when there were, for example, floods in Kashmir, I mean, that's a non-apolitical event that happened. It was a natural calamity. They were all people, I mean, even there were all people who came out. I mean, we flew down, some of us to volunteer. There were people on the ground. We were helping each other. And again, the administration was very selective in helping. And obviously they do these photo ops, which is completely brazen in today's time. They're not even doing that. They don't even care about that kind of superficial image. So increasingly, we're living in a world where they all are intertwined, where there's no, if one has to resolve something collective, or personal, it gets informed by political very fast. And there is no escape. So it's not like, oh, Kashmir is not my problem, or some other place where there's which any other conflict zone is not my problem. It is everyone's problem, because this person it's a synapse. It has reached everyone, every home, and the political apathy is really informing how our lives are going to be shaped, or are shaping.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The choice to disavow oneself from another person's grief is itself, I think, um, in some ways a political choice. And I don't think it's a choice we can afford to make, any of us, any longer. We have all been shown that very, very clearly, and I hope that we take some heed. Thank you so much, Farah. Really, thank you for writing this book, for taking the time to talk with me about it, for you know contributing a new and very, very, what must have been a very difficult thing to write, to relive, to write, and it's an honor for me as a reader, and I hope that everybody who watches will go and pick up a copy of your book. Congratulations to you on its publication, and I do wish it all the success in the world as it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhuri. Thanks for this conversation. It was really, really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you, Shohini.
Yes, thank you so much, Shohini, and Chaupaka Bookstore.
Thank you, Madhuri. Thank you, Farah, for being here today. We are very pleased that Farah's book is out in the world. You can get your copies, and you can also get your copies from Champaka Bookstore. Visit their website. They do deliver across India, and while you're at it, get a copy of Madhuri's book as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please take care and be safe. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.